AITA for humiliating my wife's boss after he called me a loser at her company dinner? During the dinner hosted by my wife's company, one of her colleagues burst out laughing. "So, what's it like being a loser?" he said with a smirk. "After all, it's your wife who supports the household, isn't it?" Laughter spread around the table, my wife included. Everyone was laughing. Everyone, except me. I forced a faint smile, then calmly turned to the company's director. "And you, Mr. Drake?" I asked in a steady voice. "How does it feel learning that this loser owns 90% of your company?" The color drained from his face instantly. At that moment, I felt invisible in the crowded room, swallowing the bitter aftertaste of bourbon and disappointment. The Hilton Hotel ballroom glittered with luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over linen tablecloths. Impeccably dressed waiters moved between conversations about quarterly results and market forecasts. Everyone had dressed with care, especially my wife, Celeste. Her emerald dress, hugging her figure, made her the undeniable queen of the evening. She chatted lightly, laughed, and gestured while recounting how she had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. I, on the other hand, felt like an intruder among her corporate predators. I wasn't sure if Celeste truly belonged in this world, but she blended in with an ease that irritated me. An irritating voice cut through my thoughts. It was Griffin Hale, Celeste's colleague, and the main reason I hated these events. With his impeccably pressed suit, hair coiffed to the millimeter, and a plastic smile, he swirled his champagne flute, already a little tipsy. "Hey, buddy," he called out, waving me over. He was surrounded by a few of Celeste's colleagues, including CEO Leonard Drake and two other managers whose names I couldn't recall. Celeste moved closer and looped her arm through mine, putting on that flawless smile of a picture-perfect corporate wife. "So, Adrian," Griffin began, raising his voice to draw attention, "what's it like being married to our rising star?" He motioned toward Celeste, nearly spilling his champagne. "Must be nice having a sugar mama, huh?" A small chuckle escaped him. I remained impassive. This wasn't his first jab, and I knew it wouldn't be his last. Griffin delighted in ridiculing men whose wives were successful. "Seriously," he continued, playing to the crowd, "what do you do all day while Celeste is conquering the business world?" "Play video games, binge-watch shows on Netflix." A wave of laughter went through the group. Celeste squeezed my hand tightly, perhaps as a warning, but when I looked at her, I saw that same strained, amused smile. She was laughing, too. "That's enough, Griffin," Leonard tried to interject diplomatically. "Come on, lighten up, it's all in good fun," Griffin replied. "I'm just curious." He turned back to me, his eyes glazed over with alcohol. "So what's it like being a loser? It must be weird when your wife pays all the bills, huh?" The words hit me like a slap in the face. For a moment, silence fell over our table. Then the laughter returned, louder, crueler. People from other tables turned to look at us. And there, next to me, my wife was genuinely laughing, without a hint of embarrassment. Something inside me broke. 15 years of marriage, of overcome struggles, of mutual support, all reduced to a punchline. I stood motionless, letting their laughter swallow me, diminish me second by second. Then, something just clicked. Maybe it was the bourbon, maybe years of accumulated silence, maybe the weariness of always being someone's husband. But when I looked up, I wasn't the same man. I smiled. A genuine smile, perhaps slightly menacing. The laughter died down. "You know, Griffin," I began in a calm voice, "you're right. From the outside, it might indeed look strange." Then I turned to Leonard, the director, whose expression was beginning to change. "Leonard," I said, maintaining the same tranquility, "and how does it feel for you to learn that this loser owns 90% of your company?" The silence that followed was so heavy you could hear the clinking of silverware on nearby tables. Leonard turned pale, frozen, his glass halfway to his lips. Celeste let go of my arm and stared at me, her jaw dropped. Griffin's smirk vanished in an instant, like a child discovering Santa Claus isn't real. "What?" Celeste whispered. I looked around the table, at the people who, seconds earlier, had been relishing in my ridicule. Now they stared at me as if I had revealed a secret from another world. Did I stutter? I asked, composed. "Do you remember that little tech startup that merged with Innovatech Solutions 5 years ago? The merger that saved you from bankruptcy?" I paused for a moment. watching the understanding dawn on Leonard's ashen face. Well, I continued, that company was mine, and I still own it. The glass in Celeste's hand slipped and hit the floor with a sharp crack, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. The sound seemed to break the heavy spell hanging in the room. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Hushed murmurs, hurried questions, chairs scraping as people shifted to hear me better. But I had already said all I needed to. I adjusted my tie, gave my wife's frozen face one last look, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, chaos erupted. Leonard's frantic voice trying to regain control, Celeste's cries begging me to stop, Griffin's indignant questions. Is all of this true? And just like that, with a few sentences, the game had just changed. After so many years of playing the part of the quiet husband, the one who supports his wife from the shadows, I had just reminded them of something they had forgotten. Never underestimate the one you mock. He might just own everything you think is yours. The hotel's marble floor echoed with my every step. I could feel the stairs burning into my back, dozens of corporate vultures craning their necks to watch the silent husband leave the room. Perfect. Let them watch. Let them imagine the price they were about to pay for their mistake. I had almost reached the revolving doors when I heard the sharp click of heels behind me. Adrian, wait. Celeste's voice, high-pitched with panic, cut through the lobby's buzz. I didn't slow down. If anything, I sped up, my hands in my pockets, dodging tourists and hurried executives. Adrian, for God's sake, stop. There was a desperation in her voice I hadn't heard in years. She could follow me to the parking garage for all I cared. I heard her stumble. Designer heels aren't made for running. But a few seconds later, she was beside me, breathless. What is all this about you owning the company? She yelled, grabbing my arm to force me to face her. I stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. I could hear her ragged breathing, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the sleeve of my jacket. When I finally turned, Celeste looked like she had seen a ghost. Her perfect makeup was starting to streak, and the dress that had been immaculate an hour ago was now wrinkled from her dash through the hotel. You really don't know? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Her gaze was a mix of genuine confusion and a perfectly acted performance. Celeste had always known how to play the right part at the right time. You really have no idea who you married. Enough with the riddles, she snapped, her voice regaining the firm tone of an executive in control. Explain to me how you can own 90% of Innovatech Solutions when you've been unemployed for the last 3 years. Unemployed. I repeated, and the word stung like a slap. It wasn't the first time I'd heard her use that term. Never to my face, of course, but often enough in conversations with her friends for me to know exactly how she saw me. Her, the brilliant career woman. Me, the man on an extended break. Do you really think I've been sitting around doing nothing while you worked? I asked with a joyless smile. What else would you call it? She retorted, her voice rising. A few passers-by turned to look, but she didn't care. You haven't had a real job since you sold your little software company. My little company. I interrupted her calmly. It was called Apex Digital, and I didn't just sell it, Celeste. I merged it with a dying tech company called Innovatech Solutions. Does that ring a bell? The blood drained from her face. I watched the pieces of the puzzle click into place in her mind, back to a time when she was just a junior analyst and I was an active entrepreneur. That's impossible, she murmured. But I could see the truth forming in her head. Apex Digital had been a major player. The merger had saved Innovatech from bankruptcy. That deal was worth millions, she whispered. Hundreds of millions of dollars, I corrected her gently. And it still is, since I never sold my shares. I simply stepped back from day-to-day management and let Leonard run the show while I focused on other things. Other things? What things exactly? She asked, less aggressive now, her voice trembling with confusion and perhaps a hint of fear. Being your husband, for one, I replied simply. Making dinner when you came home late from work. Paying the mortgage, the car insurance, and all those bills you hated opening. Supporting your career while everyone around me thought I was a freeloader. She stared at me for a long time, trying to reconcile the image of the man she thought she knew with the one standing before her. All those times she introduced me as the former IT guy. All those dinners where she joked about my early retirement at 45. All those events where guys like Griffin felt free to mock me. She had never bothered to correct anyone. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she finally asked. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have," I answered. "I wanted to know that if I lost everything one day, you would still be there. But all it took was for people to think I had nothing for them to treat me like I was nothing, and that includes you." The words hung between us like smoke. She opened her mouth to reply, but we both knew it was the truth. She had laughed. When Griffin called me a loser, when he mocked me for living off my wife, when he reduced me to nothing in front of an entire room. She had laughed. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't want to know," I corrected her coldly. "Every time someone made a joke about my unemployed life or said I was living off you, you smiled and let it happen. Never once did you say they had no idea what they were talking about." "But, Adrian, they all forgot who I was." I cut her off, my voice hardening. "But I never did. I never forgot the day, 15 years ago, when Leonard Drake came to me, begging me to save his company from bankruptcy. I never forgot signing the merger papers that made me the majority owner of Innovatech Solutions. And I never forgot that every single paycheck you've ever earned at that company, Celeste, came quite literally from my pocket." Her legs gave way, and she leaned against a pillar, gasping for air. "This is insane," she breathed. "Which means that for all those years you were climbing the corporate ladder, you were, unknowingly, working for your own husband." I finished. "That's impossible," she whispered, breathless. "And yet, funny, isn't it?" I watched the weight of the revelation crush her. Every meeting, every decision, every moment she had prided herself on being an independent woman was all part of a structure I had built long before she even knew my name. "So what happens now?" she asked in a whisper. I looked at her, dressed in a priceless gown, but looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. A part of me wanted to pull her into my arms, to tell her everything would be okay, just like before. But the other part, the one that had been bleeding for years with every laugh and every humiliation, wasn't ready to forgive. "Now," I said, readjusting my tie, my eyes locked on hers. "Now, I'm done being invisible. I'm done letting people think I'm a punchline. And maybe it's time to remind everyone at Innovatech Solutions who's been signing their checks all these years." I turned and walked away, leaving my wife alone in the hotel lobby, finally understanding that the man she married was never the man she thought she knew. The drive home was a blur of city lights and colliding thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The image of Celeste, pale and clinging to the pillar, unable to process her world collapsing, replayed in my head like a movie. By the time I parked in front of our house, the shock had given way to a cold, methodical resolve. I sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the elegant facade, a house bought with money from Apex Digital. For years, Celeste had believed it came from a distant inheritance, an explanation I had offered once without much detail, one of the many silences in our marriage. Once inside, I went straight to my office, the one room in the house Celeste almost never entered. She called it the man cave, which had always made me smile inwardly. I had let her believe I spent my days in there playing fantasy football or watching YouTube videos. The truth was far more interesting. The office looked ordinary. A desk, a computer, a few framed photos, and shelves filled with technical books and business journals. But the important things were hidden behind a concealed panel in the bookshelf. I pressed a small, hidden latch, and the panel swung open, revealing a fireproof safe. Inside were the most important documents of my life. I took out a thick folder labeled Innovatech Holdings and spread its contents on the desk like a poker player laying out his cards. This was my royal flush. Each page told the same story, but seeing them all together after so many years still gave me a thrill. These weren't just contracts and clauses. They were living proof that Adrian Wells, the man everyone saw as a parasite living off his wife, was in fact the puppet master pulling all the strings. The original merger documents were yellowed at the edges, but Leonard Drake's signature was still a deep, bold black. I remembered the day he came to this very office, sweating in his expensive suit, begging me to save his company. Back then, Innovatech Solutions was hemorrhaging clients and had 6 months left before bankruptcy. Leonard, hearing that I was planning to expand Apex Digital, had come with a proposal that was more like a surrender. "Ask for whatever you want," he had said, his voice trembling. "We need this merger to work, or we're finished." I had been generous that day, perhaps too generous. Instead of crushing Innovatech and taking its assets, I had allowed its name to survive, but I took full control, 90% of the shares, with absolute voting and veto power over all strategic decisions. Leonard kept his CEO title and a comfortable salary. The employees kept their jobs. Everyone won, especially me. But the real masterstroke was something else. I had demanded that all my shares be held in a blind trust. My entire stake was managed by a private investment firm, and my name appeared nowhere. To the world, Innovatech had been saved by a mysterious investor, a man who preferred to remain anonymous. Only Leonard and a handful of lawyers, bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements, knew the truth. I picked up the trust document and flipped to the clause I was looking for. There it was, crystal clear. The beneficiary shall have the right at any time to assume direct control of all assets upon written notification to the trustee and the board of directors. I smiled faintly. The game was finally about to change. In other words, I could step out of the shadows at any moment and take direct control of the company. The only question was, did I really want to? For the past 5 years, I had been content to let Leonard run the business while I enjoyed the dividends and a peaceful retirement. Money had never been an issue. Celeste's salary, compared to Innovatech's profits, was like pocket change. I no longer needed the spotlight or the corporate drama. I had already lived it all and had chosen a simpler life. But last night had changed everything. I had been publicly humiliated by people who owed their careers and financial stability to my generosity. Griffin Hale, that arrogant peacock, had called me a loser while collecting a paycheck from a company I owned. Celeste had laughed at jokes about her unemployed husband, building her career on a foundation I had laid myself. And Leonard, who knew exactly who I was, had stood by and said nothing. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name. Desmond Lai, my lawyer since the Apex Digital days, and one of the few people who knew all my secrets. It was almost midnight, but Desmond often worked late, finalizing complex deals. He answered on the second ring. Adrian, it's late, even for you. Is everything okay? I need you to prepare some documents, I said, getting straight to the point. I want a full audit of Innovatech's executive payroll, corporate card expenses, and any potential conflicts of interest among the senior staff. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Adrian, what's going on? You haven't been involved in Innovatech's business for years. Let's just say I had a wake-up call, I replied, and schedule a meeting with the board of directors. It's time they finally met their company's principal shareholder. Are you sure? Desmond asked cautiously. Once you step out of the blind trust, there's no going back. Your anonymity will be gone. I looked around my office. Financial reports with numbers that would make Celeste's head spin, email exchanges with Fortune 500 CEOs who still treated me as an influential figure in the tech world, and thriving stock portfolios while everyone believed I was just an idle husband. Desmond, I said firmly, I've been invisible for far too long. It's time to remind them who they're dealing with. All right, he sighed. First thing tomorrow, you'll have the official audit request, and I'll contact the board to arrange an emergency meeting. But Adrian, he hesitated, whatever you do, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't worry about my reasons. I just want everything to be legally airtight. If I make a move, it's going to be by the book. When I hung up, I sank back into my chair, staring at the documents scattered across the desk. Tomorrow, the business world that had forgotten the name Adrian Wells was about to get a rude awakening. And Celeste would finally understand that the man she considered a mere domestic accessory was actually the most powerful figure in her entire career. I carefully placed the papers back in the safe and closed it, but I already knew I would be opening it again very soon. The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of Celeste's heels clicking upstairs. The same routine as always. Coffee, news on the kitchen TV, the daily symphony of a woman readying herself to conquer another day. But this day would be different, even if she didn't know it yet. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to her footsteps. Through the walls, I could hear her voice, likely talking to her assistant about meetings and quarterly reports. Everything seemed normal, oblivious to the fact that every decision she made ultimately went through me. When I came downstairs, she was in the kitchen, standing by the counter. She wore an impeccable navy blue suit and was sipping coffee from a white mug with gold letters that read, "Boss Lady." I had given it to her as a joke for her birthday, but Celeste had adopted it with an almost symbolic seriousness. "Morning," she said without looking up from her phone. Her voice was level, almost forced, as if last night had been nothing more than a bad dream. "Morning," I replied, pouring myself a coffee and leaning against the countertop. "Sleep well?" She finally looked up. A trace of fear and uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "Adrian, about last night." "Don't worry about it." I cut her off gently. "Let's not make a big deal out of it. You were just having fun with your colleagues." "I get it." The relief on her face was painful to see. She genuinely believed I would let it all go, that I would slip back into my role as the docile husband, smiling while being ridiculed. "He was just joking," she added quickly. "You know how Griffin gets when he's had a few drinks. He didn't mean anything by it." "Of course," I replied, taking a sip. "He was just being himself. So we're good." "We're good," I agreed. She relaxed a little. She might have kissed me if she wasn't afraid of wrinkling her suit. "I'm glad you're not making a scene," she said, grabbing her bag. "Besides, we both know you're not really unemployed. You have your investments, your little consulting gigs, right?" "Right," I said without expression. "My little projects." Celeste smiled, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and headed for the garage. "I might be home late. We're closing the Morrison project. Demanding clients." "Don't worry, I won't wait up," I replied calmly. She turned back, puzzled by my tone, but said nothing. A few seconds later, the sound of her heels faded behind the door. I stood there in the silent kitchen, staring at the steam rising from my coffee mug with a single, crystal-clear thought. The Empire wakes up today, and I'll be the first one knocking at the gate. As the door closed behind her, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and typed a short email to Leonard Drake. "Leonard, we need to discuss matters related to corporate culture and management practices at Innovatech Solutions. I am requesting a full report on executive salaries, corporate card expenses, and any potential conflicts of interest among the senior staff. I would like this information by the end of the day. Regards, Adrian Wells." I read the message twice before sending it. After what had happened last night, I could easily imagine Leonard having a heart attack when my name popped up in his inbox. For 5 years, he had lived in the hope that I would remain in the shadows. Now, I was demanding financial reports like an activist investor ready to unearth a company's secrets. I hadn't even finished my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. "Desmond Lai." "Adrian," he said in his usual pragmatic tone. "I spent the night preparing the documents you asked for. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" "More than ever," I replied. "What did you find?" "The audit request is ironclad. As the majority shareholder, you have every right to examine the company's finances. I've also drafted an official notice to the board to convene an extraordinary meeting. But, Adrian," he added after a pause, "once I send this, there's no turning back. Everyone will know who you really are." "Perfect," I said calmly. "I'm tired of being anonymous." "There's something else," Desmond continued. "I reviewed Innovatech's recent transactions and found something concerning. This Griffin Hale you mentioned has been steering contracts to a company owned by his cousin. Nothing technically illegal, but highly suspicious." "I'm not surprised," I said coldly. "Guys like Griffin always find a loophole." A cold smile stretched across my lips. "And that's not all," Desmond added. "Some of the executives are using their corporate cards for personal expenses, lavish dinners, golf tournaments, business trips that look more like family vacations." Leonard isn't watching anything. Leonard had probably assumed the ghost investor would never look behind the curtain as long as the profits kept rolling in. "Send it all," I said. "The request, the notifications, everything. It's time to rattle some cages." "All right. But remember, from now on, you're not the man in the shadows. You'll be in the spotlight. And that changes everything, not just at work." After hanging up, I launched my own investigation. The findings were damning. Leonard had completely let go of the reins. He had allowed the company culture to deteriorate, morale to plummet, and had turned a blind eye to shady dealings. The company I had saved 15 years ago had become the very thing I despised, a corporate swamp. Around noon, I was ready for the next step. I drafted an email to Colette Vance, the VP of Engineering, one of the few people I truly trusted. "Colette, we don't know each other personally, but I've been following your work for some time. I believe you are exactly the kind of leader Innovatech needs right now. I would like to speak with you. Regards, Adrian Wells. I was about to hit send when my phone buzzed. A text from Celeste. Is everything okay at home? Leonard seems a bit on edge. Said he got a strange email this morning. I smiled. Everything's fine, I typed back. Tell Leonard he has nothing to worry about. I'm sure things will work themselves out. But deep down, I knew nothing would work itself out. On the contrary, things were just starting to heat up. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, waiting for the chaos to begin. Corporate rumors spread faster than cards on a poker table. By 10 in the morning, the first shockwaves were already being felt in the hallways. The phone rang again. Desmond, update, he said without preamble. Griffin Hale was just called into HR. Officially, to discuss his behavior at company events. Unofficially, your audit request has sent Leonard into a panic. I smiled satisfied. Griffin must have walked into that room thinking he was untouchable, free to mock failed husbands as he pleased. In a matter of minutes, he would discover that every joke has a price, especially when it's aimed at the company's real owner. While I was savoring the thought, a notification popped up on my computer screen. A new email from Leonard Drake. Subject: We need to talk. Urgent. I opened the email and could almost feel the panic seeping through the screen. Adrian, I have received your request and want to assure you that Innovatech upholds the highest standards of corporate governance. Perhaps we could discuss this in a more informal setting. I'm certain we can clear up any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. How ironic. The only misunderstanding here was Leonard thinking he could play games with my company while I watched silently from my retirement. I typed my reply, short and sharp. Leonard, I am not interested in informal discussions. I want the requested documents by 5 p.m. today, and the board meeting must be scheduled this week, no exceptions. Adrian Wells. By the time I closed the chat, real chaos was already erupting at Innovatech headquarters. Desmond had an informant on the inside, a lawyer from the corporate department who was feeding us updates in near real time, like something out of a corporate thriller. Soon after, the first message came in. Griffin Hale has been escorted out of the building by security. Evidence of correspondence regarding contracts with his cousin's company was found. Suspended pending investigation. I had to admit, Leonard was a fast reactor, likely terrified of what else I might uncover. In a single morning, Griffin had gone from Innovatech's golden boy to a total pariah. And that was just the beginning. The phone rang. The screen displayed a name, Celeste. I let the call go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened to the message. Adrian, what the hell is going on? Griffin was just fired. Everyone is freaking out about some audit, and Leonard looks like he's having a nervous breakdown. Call me back, please. Instead of calling her, I sent a short text. Sounds like a typical Tuesday at the office. I don't see any reason to worry. But she did. She had every reason to worry. The machine I had set in motion that morning was just picking up speed, and poor Celeste didn't realize she was witnessing her husband dismantle, piece by piece, the toxic system that had allowed guys like Griffin to think they were untouchable. Later, Desmond called with news that made my day. The board meeting is set for Thursday at 2 p.m., he announced. Leonard tried to push it to next week, but the other members are demanding an explanation for this surprise audit. They finally want to know who's been pulling the strings all these years. Excellent, I replied. And the financial reports? Leonard's assistant sent over a preliminary version. You're going to like what I found. Like was an understatement. Griffin wasn't the only one with his hands in the cookie jar. There was a whole network of questionable expenses and ethical breaches within the executive team. I felt a cold, familiar satisfaction. These people had gotten too used to thinking the ghost investor would never look at what they were doing. They had mistaken my discretion for weakness. They had treated my investment like an open vault and my patience as complacency. By 3 p.m., the company rumor mill was in overdrive. Celeste was sending me increasingly frantic texts. 2 more directors suspended. There's talk of a massive restructuring. Everyone is panicking. Then, at 4 p.m., the message that put everything into perspective arrived. Adrian, please tell me you're not behind this. People are losing their jobs, and I can't afford to be involved. My career is my life. Her career, not our marriage, not the life we had built. Her career, the career that only existed because I had built the ground she walked on. She didn't want to understand why I was doing this. She just wanted to save her own name in the boardroom hallways. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Desmond. Speed everything up, I said. Move the board meeting to tomorrow if you can. We need to strike while the iron is hot. Are you sure you don't want to take this slowly? He suggested. We could start with a private conversation with Leonard. No, I cut him off. 15 years of slowly is enough. It's time everyone remembers who's in charge here. At 5 p.m., Leonard finally sent the requested documents, and it was even worse than I had imagined. Obscene bonuses, corporate retreats at luxury resorts, and a level of nepotism that would make a mafia dynasty blush. For all these years, they had treated Innovatech like an expensive toy, and I, the true owner, had been standing in the shadows watching them play with my money. But the silent Adrian Wells was dead. The man who smiled while his wife's colleagues mocked him was gone. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom and remind every single one of them who really owned this company. And if Celeste didn't like it, well, she had 15 years to find out who she had married. If her career mattered more than her husband, maybe it was time we reevaluated our priorities. The game had changed, and I was just getting started. The next morning broke with a slight autumn chill, the kind of morning that sharpens the mind. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie of a suit I hadn't worn in 3 years. A bespoke charcoal gray Armani, worth more than the monthly salary of some of the executives I was about to face. Celeste had already left early. She mentioned a crisis meeting. Ironic given that the crisis was coming directly from my desk. Before the mysterious board meeting, the entire Innovatech headquarters was walking on eggshells. The irony of the situation was delicious. My own wife was trying to shield herself from the fallout of my actions, never suspecting she was married to the epicenter of the storm. The drive to Innovatech headquarters felt like a journey back in time. I had been there dozens of times, always as Celeste's husband, the quiet man invited to the Christmas party and the company picnic. But today, I was walking through those glass doors as Adrian Wells, the majority shareholder, the man who had been pulling the strings from the shadows for 15 years. In the underground parking garage, Desmond was waiting for me. Impeccable in his Navy suit, holding a leather briefcase that was worth more than some cars. Ready for this? He asked, studying my face. I've been ready for 15 years, I replied calmly. I just didn't know it yet. The elevator ascended in silence, accompanied by a soft jazz melody. The numbers lit up, 10, 15. And with each floor, something inside me shifted. When the doors opened, the invisible Adrian Wells was gone. Leonard was waiting outside the boardroom, pacing nervously, his suit soaked with sweat. When he saw me, he went pale. Adrian, he exclaimed, forcing a strained smile and extending his hand. It's been so long. You look great. I shook his damp hand and replied, You too, Leonard. I imagine you weren't expecting to see me here again. Well, you've always been welcome. Important. Valuable to the company. He stammered, stumbling over each word like a teenager on a first date. I smiled. My company, Leonard. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. You can say it plainly, Leonard, I said, my voice calm and sharp. This company belongs to me. The doors opened, and I saw before me the people who, for all these years, had been making decisions about my investment. 5 board members, all wearing that confused and slightly irritated expression of people pulled from their comfort for an emergency meeting. They probably thought this was just another minor internal fire that Leonard would put out with his charm and a few flimsy excuses. They were wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, Leonard began, his voice wavering, trying to maintain control of the inevitable. Allow me to introduce Adrian Wells. The silence that followed was almost perfect. You could see the internal struggle on their faces as they tried to remember where they had heard that name before. Then, one by one, their expressions lit up with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. Wait, said Meredith Shaw, the only woman on the board. Adrian Wells, as in, from Apex Digital? The one and only, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. A pleasure to finally meet you all in person. What followed was a masterclass in corporate panic. Papers were shuffled nervously, urgent whispers were exchanged, and glances were darted over laptop screens. Leonard looked like he was 2 seconds away from hiding under the table. There must be some mistake, stammered Julian Kwan, the board's treasurer. Our records show that Apex Digital was acquired through a blind trust. The beneficiary's identity has always been confidential. Not confidential, Julian. Private. There's a difference. I corrected him curtly. Leonard knew exactly who I was from day one. Didn't you, Leonard? He hesitated before nodding, his voice low. Yes, Mr. Wells preferred to remain anonymous while the company found its new direction after the merger. 15 years is a long time to find a direction, isn't it? I retorted, opening the briefcase Desmond had prepared. And more than enough time for some people to forget who's really paying the bills around here. I spread financial reports, expense statements, and irrefutable proof of Griffin's nepotism across the table, a complete portrait of a company adrift. Which is why I'm here, I said in a calm but firm voice. Executives are traveling on the company's dime, hiring their friends and cousins, and fostering a culture of mockery and impunity. Meredith leaned over the documents. These are serious accusations. If even half of this is true. It's all true, I cut her off. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. When you think the owner isn't watching, you turn his company into your private playground. Leonard was dripping with sweat. Adrian, if there have been any irregularities, we can investigate internally, go through the proper channels. The proper channel is right here, I said, standing up. Me, taking back control of the company that has always been mine. That is why we are here. I pulled the final document from the briefcase, a formal letter of intent drafted by Desmond the previous night. Effective immediately, as the majority shareholder, I am assuming executive leadership of Innovatech Solutions. Leonard, I thank you for your services, but your resignation is effective immediately. The room erupted in murmurs and stifled gasps. I raised a hand, demanding silence. I'm not finished, I continued. Griffin Hale's termination, of course, stands. But that's just the beginning. Profound changes are coming. We are going to rebuild this leadership team and, more importantly, the very culture of this company. I walked over to the large bay windows. From there, I could see the city, glass and steel towers reflecting the golden late afternoon light. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Celeste was probably sitting at her desk, unaware that her husband had just fired her boss and taken over the company she had dedicated her life to. You see, I said, turning back to them. I have watched this company from the shadows for 15 years. I've seen how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. I've seen how you operate when you think the money will always flow. I paused, looking at each of them. Well, that important person was watching all along. And the money only kept flowing because I allowed it to. But those days are over. Leonard slumped in his chair, ashen. What now? He stammered. I smiled, a cold, hard smile. Now, we rebuild this company from the ground up. With respect, transparency, and accountability. The values you all love to feature in your annual reports while doing the exact opposite. I calmly packed the documents back into the briefcase and, before leaving, added, Oh, and Leonard, clean out your desk by the end of the day. Security will escort you. As I left the room, chaos erupted behind me. Frantic phone calls, raised voices, impromptu huddles. A house of cards was collapsing in slow motion, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The silent Adrian Wells was dead. Long live the king. The special board meeting began at exactly 6:47 p.m. 17 minutes later, it was over, the most satisfying 17 minutes of my entire career. Sitting at the head of the table, I watched the 5 board members who, until today, had never dared to challenge a single one of Leonard's decisions. Now, they seemed eager to distance themselves from him. All in favor of approving the termination of Leonard Drake, effective immediately? I asked. They all knew this wasn't just a termination. It was a security-escorted expulsion. 5 hands shot up without hesitation. Even Meredith Shaw, Leonard's loyalist for over a decade, voted in favor. Corporate loyalty is a beautiful thing until it threatens your own seat. Motion carried, I declared. Next item. The next point, the permanent dismissal of Griffin Hale. A unanimous vote. The sound of pens signing the minutes was the sweetest symphony. No one dared defend the man who had funneled contracts to his cousin's company while mocking the true owner of the business. It's funny how quickly people's perspectives change once they find out who really signs their paychecks. But the real shock came when I announced Leonard's successor. I am appointing Colette Vance as the new Chief Executive Officer of Innovatech Solutions. The silence in the room became almost palpable. Colette Vance, from the engineering department? Julian Kwan repeated, stunned, as if I had just proposed putting a circus clown in charge of the company. She's never held an executive position. Never, I confirmed. Because for 15 years, this company has only promoted people who play golf with the right crowd, not those who get real results. While your teams were squandering budgets, Colette was solving problems on the ground. While Leonard was giving speeches about innovation, Colette was actually innovating. With all due respect, Mr. Wells, Meredith interjected cautiously. Appointing someone from a technical field directly to CEO is a risky move. Perhaps we should consider external candidates. With all due respect, Meredith. I cut her off. I own this company. And Colette Vance will be the new CEO. Another vote, another unanimous decision. It's fascinating how cooperative people become when their salary depends on a single signature. By 7:30 p.m., Colette was already sitting in the boardroom. She was still in her beige engineering uniform, a polo shirt with the Innovatech logo. She looked like someone who had just won the lottery. 20 minutes earlier, I had simply called her. Colette, come up to the boardroom, immediately. She had come, not understanding why. But when I explained that she was about to become the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, I saw a fire in her eyes, a passion I hadn't seen in Innovatech's leadership for years. I want you to run this company with respect, I said, as the board members hastily exited the room, muttering things like contingency plan and crisis communications. Respect for the employees, for the customers, and most importantly, for the true purpose of this company, to solve problems, not to line pockets. Colette nodded, speechless. Tears began to well up in the corners of her eyes. Mr. Wells, I don't even know what to say. I've spent years watching how things work here. The politics, the hypocrisy. I always dreamed of a day when someone would finally care about results, not appearances. Well, that day is here, I replied. You have my full confidence, a blank check, and the green light to clean up whatever needs cleaning. As I stood up to leave, I saw Celeste through the glass partition, standing in the hallway, her face as white as chalk. She had undoubtedly heard the rumors, the emergency meeting, Leonard's ousting, the complete corporate overhaul. But for the first time since this all began, she looked at me without anger or confusion. In her eyes, there was something new, respect, or maybe fear. At this point, the two looked strangely similar. Colette, I added, turning back to the new CEO, start with the staff. I want a merit-based evaluation, not one based on friendships. The best rise, the dead weight gets cut. This company needs to remember what it feels like to earn success, not inherit it. I walked past Celeste without a word, leaving her there, frozen, trying to process it all. Her invisible husband not only owned the company, he had just rebuilt it from the ground up in a single night. I had only taken 3 steps into the house when she exploded like a shaken champagne bottle. She must have broken every speed limit to get home 20 minutes before me. Now, she was pacing the living room, panting like a caged animal. You humiliated me, she screamed, spinning around, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Do you realize what you've done? The entire office is talking about it. They're saying I didn't even know who my own husband was. They think I'm either the worst wife in the world or a complete idiot. I loosened my tie, took off my jacket, and placed it on a chair, letting her vent her fury. What are you really afraid of? I asked calmly. What people think of me, or what they think of you. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me, she yelled. I spent years building my reputation there. Years proving I deserved my spot. And you destroyed it all in one night. My boss is Colette Vance. Colette from engineering. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? About as humiliating, I replied, sitting down on the sofa, as listening to your colleagues call your husband a loser while you laughed along with them. She stopped dead in the middle of the living room, gaping like a fish out of water. That's different, she stammered. That was just an innocent joke between coworkers. Innocent, I repeated softly. Of course. When Griffin called me unemployed, that was innocent. When he asked me what it was like to be a loser, that was innocent too. When he laughed about you paying the bills while I smiled in silence. That was all just innocent fun, wasn't it? I laughed because I was embarrassed, she exclaimed, gesturing wildly. What did you want me to do? Make a scene in the middle of dinner? I sank back into the sofa and looked at her for a long time. The woman I had shared 15 years of my life with was finally seeing what she had always refused to see. She was throwing a fit at home not out of remorse, but out of shame. Not because she felt bad for me, but because her image, that of the perfect, accomplished, and admired woman, had just been shattered. "You should have defended your husband," I said in a low, sharp voice. "You should have told Griffin to shut his mouth and show me some respect. You should have acted like someone who knows who she's married to." "But I didn't know," she cried. And for the first time, the truth came tumbling out. "I didn't know you still owned the whole thing. You never told me. I thought you were living off investments, a little consulting, that you were more or less retired. You cooked, you did DIY projects, you took care of the house. I thought that I was living off of you," I finished calmly. "That you were the provider and I was the unemployed husband. And that was fine, until someone said it out loud." She collapsed onto the sofa, wrinkling her expensive suit, her perfect hairstyle coming undone strand by strand. "That's not fair. I never saw you that way." "Really, Celeste?" I said, turning to her. "At every company event for the past 3 years, you introduced me as the former IT guy. You gave me a mug for my birthday that said, 'World's Best Husband,' with that little ironic smile. You told your mother I was having a midlife crisis when I bought my motorcycle. And what was all that? Innocent jokes." I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. "They weren't jokes, Celeste. They were signs. Signs of what you really thought of me. And the moment Griffin said out loud what you'd been thinking for years, you laughed. Because to you it was true." Behind me, I heard her short, broken, muffled sobs. A week ago, it might have broken my heart. But now, all I felt was a profound exhaustion. Tired of being misunderstood, tired of being underestimated, tired of living with a woman for whom reputation was worth more than her husband's dignity. "I just wanted you to love me, even if I had nothing," I continued without turning around. "I wanted to believe that if it all came crashing down tomorrow, you would still be by my side. But all it took was for the world to believe I had nothing, for everyone to start treating me like I was nothing, and that includes you." "Adrian, please," she whispered. "You were laughing while they called me a loser, Celeste. You were there, in that brightly lit room, in the dress I paid for, at the party hosted by my company, and you laughed when they called your husband a failure." Now she was really crying, her shoulders shaking as she curled up on the sofa. She looked like a broken doll. "Forgive me," she sobbed. "I'm begging you, forgive me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I turned back, and for the first time in 15 years of marriage, I felt no urge to hold her while she cried. "You didn't want to know, Celeste. That's different." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What's going to happen now?" she asked in a trembling voice. I looked at the woman I had shared a life with. The one who had built her career without understanding it rested on my foundation. The one who had laughed at my supposed weaknesses while living off my successes. "Now," I said after a silence, "now, you get to find out who you married. And I get to decide if I still want to be your husband." The following weeks at Innovatech Solutions were like watching a phoenix rise from the ashes. I returned to the headquarters for the first time in years, but no longer as Celeste's husband. I was Adrian Wells, the man behind the curtain. The transformation was spectacular. Colette Vance took charge as if she were born for the role. In her first week, she implemented an open-door policy, held Friday town hall meetings, and encouraged everyone to speak freely, without fear or censorship. She launched a full audit of contracts, partnerships, and expenses. The toxic atmosphere that had festered under Leonard dissipated like fog in the sun. "Mr. Wells," Colette told me in a meeting, "I've never seen staff morale climb this quickly. People are proud to work here again." And she was right. Walking through the hallways, I could see the difference. People were collaborating, laughing, and sharing ideas instead of hiding behind walls of fear. The once silent cafeteria now buzzed with conversations and music. Someone had even brought in a speaker, and soft jazz played during lunch. Griffin's case collapsed exactly as Desmond had predicted. Faced with a mountain of evidence of favoritism and contract manipulation, his lawyers advised him to accept a confidential settlement and disappear. He ended up in Arizona, at some mid-sized firm in Phoenix, probably telling everyone he was a victim of corporate politics. Meanwhile, Celeste resigned. "I need to figure out who I am," she said one morning, her voice devoid of emotion. If I'm not climbing the ladder at Innovatech, what's left of me? I didn't argue. It was the best decision she could have made. Her presence at the office would have been awkward. Half the staff knew she was married to the owner. The other half was still trying to figure out how no one had noticed. But the true symbol of the new era was the creation of the Adrian Wells Fund for Engineering Education, offering scholarships and mentorship to young people from modest backgrounds who dreamed of a career in technology. Innovatech Solutions was finally starting to give back to the world what I had always wanted it to embody: the ability to be reborn, to transform, and to be underestimated until the day everyone discovers who was really pulling the strings. For years, I had made donations from the shadows, sending checks to charities and social projects without ever putting my name on them. But this time, I decided to put my name and my story to work for something bigger. The first meeting of the Adrian Wells Fund Scholars took place in Innovatech's main conference room, the same room where I had dismissed Leonard just months before. 25 young people from public schools, along with their parents, teachers, and mentors, had gathered to celebrate a new beginning. These weren't kids from wealthy families or those with influential connections. They were boys and girls hungry for knowledge, brimming with talent, who needed only one thing: for someone to believe in them. I used to prefer staying in the shadows. I signed checks, sent donations, and that was it. But today, I was there, present, looking these young people in the eye, shaking their hands, and listening to their stories. I was showing them that respect and hard work still opened doors. The sweetest revenge wasn't punishment, it was creation, creating something better than what came before. 3 months later, I stepped back into the same ballroom at the Hilton Hotel where this whole story had begun. But this time, everything was different. The event was an Innovatech gala dinner, organized by Colette Vance, now a respected and admired leader. The room still glittered, but without the ostentation. The atmosphere was one of sincerity, with real conversations, genuine laughter, and a shared sense of pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colette announced into the microphone, beaming, "please welcome Adrian Wells, the man who believed in Innovatech before anyone else, and the visionary who is helping us build something truly meaningful." The applause filled the room, warm and sincere, nothing like the mocking laughter that had echoed there months ago. I walked to the stage, passing tables where people sat who had once seen me as nothing more than Celeste's quiet husband. Now, they knew. It was because of that quiet man that they still had jobs. No whispers about the unemployed husband, no looks of pity, only respect. In the third row, I saw Celeste. She wore a simple black dress, no power suit, no executive mask. Yes, we were still married, at least on paper. But everything between us had changed. She had started therapy, was now involved in the fund's activities, and was slowly learning to see me, not as an accessory to her career, but as the man who had silently supported everything. Whether it was too late or just in time, only the future would tell. I took the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you," I began, scanning the faces filled with expectation and respect, not mockery. 3 months ago, some of you discovered something about me that surprised you. But the real shock isn't that I was the owner of Innovatech all along. The real shock is what we have built together since. I gestured to Colette, who smiled proudly. Under her leadership, Innovatech has rediscovered the true meaning of the word solve. We've created an environment where good ideas are valued more than good connections, where honest work is recognized, and where respect is no longer just an empty word in an annual report. The Adrian Wells Fund had already awarded scholarships to its first class of 15 students, young people who had just started college and were already showing remarkable results. The mentorship program now connected our engineers with teenagers from underprivileged neighborhoods, building a bridge between dreams and opportunities. I looked out at the room again. The golden lights reflected in the glasses, on the attentive faces, on the applauding hands. And in that moment, I understood. True revenge was never about destruction. It was about building something better, proving that power, when used with purpose and conscience, can transform everything it touches. The cruel laughter from that night had long since faded, and in its place was something infinitely more valuable, a legacy worth leaving. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.